Most people fail financially not because they're reckless, but because they're obedient. They follow advice that sounds prudent. They make choices society applauds. They pursue paths their parents recommend, their colleagues validate, and their financial advisors endorse. And 30 years later, they wake up financially dependent, wondering what went wrong. Charlie Munger spent his life studying human misjudgment. He understood that the most dangerous errors aren't the obvious ones. They're the ones disguised as wisdom. The decisions that trap intelligent people aren't stupid decisions. They're socially acceptable decisions, institutionally reinforced decisions, decisions that feel responsible in the moment but compound into financial imprisonment over decades. Let me show you what I mean. Decision 1. Buying the house you can afford. When most people reach a certain income level, they immediately calculate the maximum house they can finance. Banks encourage this. Real estate agents celebrate it. Family members congratulate them. It feels like progress, like adulthood, like success. But here's what Munger would ask. What is this decision really optimizing for? It's not optimizing for wealth accumulation. It's optimizing for status signaling and immediate comfort. The mortgage industry has spent decades conditioning people to view the largest possible house payment as what you can afford. This is linguistic manipulation. What you can afford and what you should buy are completely different questions. The person who buys the maximum house they can afford has just committed their most productive earning years to a depreciating asset that demands constant maintenance, property taxes, insurance, and opportunity cost. They've locked themselves into a job they may hate because they need that paycheck to service the debt. They've eliminated their financial flexibility exactly when they should be building it. Munger called this incentive-caused bias. The real estate and banking industries benefit enormously from you believing that bigger is better, that home ownership is always superior to renting, that your house is an investment rather than a consumption decision. These aren't your incentives, they're theirs. But you're the one who will live with the consequences. Decision 2. Financing the reliable new car. Here's another socially celebrated decision. Trading in your paid-off vehicle for a new one with a loan, justified by reliability and warranty coverage. This decision makes intuitive sense. New cars break down less frequently. Warranties provide peace of mind. Monthly payments feel manageable when spread over 6 or 7 years. But let's invert this, as Munger taught. What is the real cost? The average new car loses 20 to 30% of its value the moment it leaves the lot. You're immediately underwater on a depreciating asset. The monthly payment, say $500, might seem affordable, but over 7 years, that's $42,000 plus interest. Now add the opportunity cost. If you had kept your paid-off car for another 5 years and invested that monthly payment instead, earning a conservative 8% annually, you'd have accumulated over $45,000. Not $42,000 spent, $45,000 owned. The person who continually finances new cars every few years is making a mathematically guaranteed decision to remain financially dependent. They're choosing the dopamine hit of a new vehicle over the compounding power of invested capital, and they're doing it with society's full approval. Decision 3. The good college at any price education is sacred in our culture. Parents are told that investing in their children's education is the highest priority, that a degree from a prestigious institution is worth any sacrifice, that student loans are good debt. Munger valued education intensely, but he also valued rationality. And there's nothing rational about paying $200,000 for an undergraduate degree when comparable education is available for a fraction of that cost. The decision to pursue prestige over value in education is driven by multiple biases. There's social proof, everyone else is doing it. There's authority bias. Prestigious institutions and guidance counselors insist it's necessary. There's availability bias. We remember the success stories, not the countless graduates drowning in debt. But the mathematics are brutal. A graduate with $80,000 in student loans at 6% interest will pay over $30,000 in interest alone over 10 years. That's $30,000 of earnings, after tax, going to a bank instead of building wealth. And that doesn't account for the opportunity cost of what that money could have earned if invested. The person who makes this decision isn't thinking clearly about return on investment. They're outsourcing their judgment to institutional prestige and social pressure. Munger would call this exactly the kind of conventional thinking that guarantees conventional results, which for most people means financial limitation. Decision 4. The safe corporate career society trains us to seek stable employment with large corporations. Benefits, predictable paychecks, retirement accounts, the illusion of security. This is the default path for intelligent people. But Munger understood that perceived safety often masks actual risk. The person who builds their entire financial life around corporate employment is taking an enormous, unhedged bet on their continued employability within a system they don't control. Corporate restructurings, technological disruption, economic downturns, age discrimination, these are all outside your control. Yet the typical employee has concentrated virtually all their economic value in a single stream of income that can disappear with 2 weeks' notice. This isn't financial security. This is financial fragility disguised as safety. The deeper problem is the incentive structure. Employees are rewarded for compliance, not for building independent economic value. They trade time for money in a linear relationship that caps their upside while exposing them to uncapped downside. Meanwhile, they forego the development of skills, networks, and assets that could generate income independently. 20 years into this path, they're trapped. They have lifestyle obligations calibrated to their salary, minimal savings, and skills that are valuable only within the context of employment. They've become financially dependent on institutions that owe them nothing. These 4 decisions, the maximum house, the new car, the prestigious degree, the stable job, are all considered responsible, mature, even admirable. Parents recommend them. Society celebrates them. Institutions profit from them. And they're all traps. Not because they're individually catastrophic, but because together they create a pattern of thinking that prioritizes short-term comfort and social approval over long-term financial independence. Munger spent his life identifying patterns others missed. The pattern here is clear. Most people fail financially, not from a single bad decision, but from a lifetime of reasonable decisions that were never actually reasonable. They were just socially acceptable. Charlie Munger built his fortune and reputation by thinking about problems differently than others. While most people asked, "How do I succeed?" Munger asked, "How do I avoid being an idiot?" This is the power of inversion, solving problems by identifying what destroys value rather than chasing what creates it. Let's invert these reasonable decisions and see what we find. The real cost of the maximum house. The standard narrative is that home ownership builds wealth through forced savings and price appreciation. This sounds logical until you examine what's actually happening. When you purchase the maximum house you can afford, you've committed to the largest possible fixed expense relative to your income. This has several compounding negative effects. First, you've eliminated your margin of safety. Munger was obsessed with margin of safety, the buffer between what you think will happen and what could go wrong. When you maximize your housing expense, you're living at the edge of your means. Any disruption, job loss, medical emergency, market downturn becomes catastrophic because you have no financial cushion. Second, you've created an opportunity cost machine. Every month, thousands of dollars that could compound in your favor are instead servicing debt and maintaining property. Over 30 years, the difference between buying the maximum house versus a modest house compounds dramatically. Not just in mortgage interest saved, but in what that capital difference could have earned if invested in productive assets. Let's be specific. Person A buys a $500,000 house with a $400,000 mortgage. Person B buys a $300,000 house with a $200,000 mortgage. Both earn the same income. The difference in monthly payment is roughly $1,200. Person A feels successful. They have the nicer house, the better neighborhood, the validation of their peers. Person B invests that $1,200 monthly difference. Over 20 years, at a conservative 8% annual return, that difference grows to over $700,000. That's not counting the $200,000 in equity that Person B has already paid off on their smaller mortgage. Person A has a house. Person B has a paid-off house and $700,000 in liquid productive assets. Person A is still dependent on their job. Person B has options. This is the power of understanding opportunity cost. Every dollar committed to excess housing is a dollar that can't compound elsewhere. Munger understood that wealth isn't built by optimizing for appearance, it's built by optimizing for compounding. The car trap is a compounding machine in reverse. The automobile industry has engineered one of the most effective wealth extraction mechanisms in modern society. They've convinced people that a depreciating asset financed with debt is a normal, responsible decision. Let's examine the psychology. Why do intelligent people repeatedly make this decision? It's a combination of biases. There's the availability heuristic. They remember the one time their old car broke down, not the 50 times it didn't. There's present bias. The immediate pleasure of a new car feels more real than the future value of invested money. There's social comparison. Their colleagues drive new cars, so they feel entitled to the same, but the mathematics are merciless. Consider someone who, starting at age 25, finances a new car every 7 years until retirement. 4 cars over 40 years, each financed at $40,000 with interest. That's roughly $200,000 spent on vehicles over their working life. Now consider the alternative. Buy a reliable used car for $15,000 cash. Drive it for 10 years. Repeat 3 more times, total spent $60,000. The difference, $140,000, invested at 8% over 40 years becomes over $3 million. $3 million. That's the cost of needing a new car. This isn't even accounting for the higher insurance, registration fees, and opportunity cost of the monthly payments during each loan period. Munger would observe that the person making this decision isn't thinking, they're feeling. They're letting the car industry's incentives override their own rational self-interest. The salesman makes a commission, the bank collects interest, the manufacturer moves inventory. And you get the privilege of working longer to pay for it all. Education, debt, and the destruction of options. The college debt trap is particularly insidious because it targets young people before they've developed financial judgment, and it's wrapped in the language of investment and opportunity. But let's be precise about what's actually happening. When an 18-year-old takes out $100,000 in student loans to attend a prestigious university, they're making a bet. They're betting that the credential will generate sufficient additional lifetime earnings to justify the cost plus opportunity cost of that debt. For some careers, medicine, law, certain technical fields, this bet may be rational. For most undergraduate degrees, it's not. The immediate consequence is that the graduate enters the workforce with a massive handicap. They need to earn enough, not just to live, but to service debt from consumption that's already occurred. This eliminates their flexibility. They can't take career risks. They can't pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. They can't build savings while making debt payments. They're trapped in a forced march to pay off the past instead of building the future. The deeper problem is psychological. Debt creates a scarcity mindset. When you owe money, you think short-term. You optimize for immediate cash flow rather than long-term value creation. You become risk-averse in exactly the phase of life when you should be risk-tolerant. Munger understood that your 20s and 30s are when you have the most time for compounding and the least to lose from failure. Saddling yourself with debt during this period is like running a race with weights on your ankles. You might still finish, but you've guaranteed you won't win. The rational decision is to minimize educational debt ruthlessly. Go to a less prestigious school. Work while studying. Choose in-demand fields. Live like a student longer. These choices might feel like sacrifices, but they preserve the most valuable asset you have, optionality, the employment trap, and the illusion of security. The traditional employment path offers a powerful psychological comfort, predictability. You know what you'll earn, you know your schedule, you know your role. This predictability feels like security. But Munger would point out that predictability isn't the same as safety. In fact, it can be the opposite. When you build your entire financial life around a single employer or even a single career path, you've created an undiversified risk profile. You're a one-product company, and that product is your labor within a specific context. The problem compounds over time. As you age, you become more expensive to employ and potentially less adaptable to change. Meanwhile, your lifestyle has inflated to match your income. You have mortgage payments, car payments, education expenses for children, and the accumulated consumption habits of decades. If that employment ends, whether from layoffs, health issues, or industry disruption, you're financially exposed with limited options. You haven't built transferable skills outside your employment context. You haven't developed alternate income streams. You haven't created assets that work without you. This is the opposite of financial freedom. This is financial dependence with a salary. The alternative isn't to avoid employment, it's to treat employment as one component of a broader wealth-building strategy, not the entire strategy. It's to live well below your means so you can invest the difference. It's to develop skills and relationships that have value outside your current job. It's to build assets, businesses, real estate, investment portfolios that generate income independently. Munger and his partner Warren Buffett both worked for others early in their careers, but they treated those jobs as learning opportunities and capital accumulation phases, not as destinations. They were always building toward independence. The pattern beneath the pattern, all of these decisions share a common structure. They optimize for social approval and immediate emotional comfort at the expense of long-term financial independence. They're sustained by powerful institutional incentives. Banks profit from your mortgages. Car companies profit from your financing. Universities profit from your tuition. Employers profit from your dependence. None of these institutions are evil. They're simply responding to their own incentives. But their incentives aren't your incentives. And if you let their incentives guide your decisions, you'll end up serving their interests, not yours. Munger spent his life studying incentives because he understood they shape behavior more powerfully than intentions. If you want to understand why you make the financial decisions you make, Don't look at your goals. Look at the incentive structures surrounding those decisions. The path to financial freedom requires thinking independently about incentives and being willing to make decisions that appear strange, uncomfortable, or even irresponsible to others. Because the decisions that appear responsible to the crowd are often the ones that guarantee you'll remain part of the crowd, financially dependent and working until you can't. Charlie Munger didn't believe in get-rich-quick schemes, secret formulas, or financial wizardry. He believed in thinking clearly, avoiding stupidity, and letting compounding do its work over time. Financial freedom isn't complicated, but it is hard, because it requires making decisions that feel wrong in a culture designed to make them feel wrong. Let me be direct about what actually works. Principle 1. Invert the housing decision. Instead of asking, what's the maximum house I can afford? Ask, what's the minimum house that meets my actual needs? This isn't about deprivation. It's about optimization. A house is shelter and space for living. Beyond that, every additional dollar you spend is buying something else: status, impression management, the approval of people who don't care about your financial future. Munger lived in the same modest house for decades, even as his wealth grew to billions. He understood that real wealth is measured in freedom and options, not in the square footage of your residence. The practical application is this: buy a house that costs no more than 2 to 3 times your annual household income. If you earn $100,000, your house should cost $200,000 to $300,000, not $500,000. This accomplishes several things simultaneously. It ensures you have margin of safety in your budget. It dramatically reduces interest paid over the life of the mortgage. It frees up capital to invest in productive assets. And it eliminates the psychological stress of being house poor. Yes, this might mean living in a less fashionable neighborhood. It might mean having a smaller yard or an older kitchen. These are not sacrifices. They're strategic choices that prioritize long-term freedom over short-term appearance. The person who makes this choice consistently will build wealth. The person who doesn't, won't. It's that simple. Principle 2. Buy reliability, not status. Transportation is a necessity. New cars are not. The rational approach to vehicles is to buy reliable, used cars with cash and drive them until the cost of maintenance exceeds the cost of replacement. For most reliable brands, this means keeping a car for 10 to 15 years or more. This decision saves hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime, money that can compound into genuine wealth rather than evaporating through depreciation. Munger drove modest cars. Buffett drove a used Cadillac for years. These weren't signs of cheapness. They were signs of understanding what actually matters. A car gets you from point A to point B. Everything beyond that is ego, and ego is expensive. Here's the psychological challenge. You'll feel behind. Your colleagues will drive nicer cars. You'll be tempted to justify an upgrade. This is exactly when you need to remember that financial freedom is built by making decisions that feel uncomfortable to others, but make mathematical sense to you. The rule is simple. Never finance a depreciating asset. If you can't buy it with cash, you can't afford it. Save up, buy used, drive it into the ground, repeat. This single decision, consistently applied, is worth millions of dollars in lifetime wealth. Principle 3. Optimize education for value, not prestige. Education is valuable. Educational debt is dangerous. The goal is to maximize the first while minimizing the second. This means being ruthlessly practical about educational decisions. Choose schools based on return on investment, not rankings. Consider community college for the first 2 years. Work while studying. Choose majors with clear employment paths. Graduate with minimal or zero debt. Munger valued learning intensely, but he was also clear-eyed about institutional education. Much of what universities teach is available for free or cheap if you're willing to read and think independently. The credential matters for certain paths, but you don't need to pay premium prices for credentials that don't generate premium returns. The person who graduates with a useful degree and no debt has an enormous advantage over the person who graduates from a prestigious school with 6 figures of debt. The first person can take risks, build assets, and invest early. The second person is trapped in a decade of catch-up. If you have children, teach them this early. The best gift you can give them isn't a prestigious education, it's financial literacy and the freedom that comes from avoiding unnecessary debt. Principle 4. Build assets outside employment. Employment is fine. Employment as your only source of income is fragile. The path to financial freedom requires building assets that generate income independently of your time. This could be investment portfolios, rental properties, small businesses, royalties from intellectual property, anything that creates cash flow without requiring your direct labor. Munger and Buffett both built their fortunes through compounding investments, not through salaries. They used employment income early in their careers to accumulate capital, which they then invested in assets that compounded over decades. This is the fundamental pattern. Earn through labor, invest in assets, let the assets compound. Eventually the assets generate more income than the labor. At that point, you're financially free. The practical steps are straightforward. Live below your means. Invest the difference consistently. Choose low-cost, diversified investments. Never panic sell. Let time do its work. Most people won't do this because it requires patience and delayed gratification. They'll find reasons to spend the excess income. They'll chase returns through speculation. They'll panic during market downturns, but the people who simply save consistently, invest in productive assets, and wait patiently will build substantial wealth over time, not through brilliance but through discipline. Principle 5. Avoid stupidity more than you seek brilliance. Munger's most famous advice was to invert, to solve problems by avoiding what destroys rather than chasing what creates. In financial terms, this means avoiding the big mistakes more than seeking the big wins. Don't speculate with money you can't afford to lose. Don't take on high-interest debt. Don't invest in things you don't understand. Don't follow crowds into bubbles. Don't let ego drive financial decisions. The person who simply avoids financial stupidity will outperform the majority who are constantly seeking the next opportunity, the hot stock, the perfect timing. This is psychologically difficult because it's passive. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything. But in financial life, not doing stupid things is the highest form of action. The uncomfortable truth. Real financial freedom requires making decisions that will make you weird. You'll live in a smaller house than your peers. You'll drive an older car. You'll decline social events because they're expensive. You'll say no to things others consider normal. You'll be misunderstood, questioned, and possibly mocked. This is the price of independence. You can have the approval of the crowd, or you can have financial freedom. You cannot have both, because financial freedom requires doing exactly what the crowd refuses to do. Munger lived this. He made unconventional decisions that seemed strange to others, but made perfect sense from first principles. He thought independently, acted rationally, and let compound interest do its work over many decades. He didn't become wealthy from a single brilliant insight. He became wealthy from consistently avoiding stupidity while others repeatedly made the same predictable mistakes. The final reality. Financial freedom isn't mystical, it's mathematical. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference in productive assets. Avoid debt on depreciating assets. Give it time to compound. That's the entire formula. The reason most people don't achieve it isn't because they don't know the formula. It's because they're unwilling to execute it. They'd rather have the appearance of success now than the reality of freedom later. Munger would tell you that this is a choice. Not a choice between rich and poor, but a choice between independent thinking and conventional thinking, between long-term rationality and short-term emotionality, between building wealth and signaling status. You cannot serve both masters. Choose one. If you choose conventional thinking, the maximum house, the new car, the prestigious degree, the stable job, you'll get conventional results. You'll work until you're old, depend on others for security, and wonder where your life went. If you choose rational thinking, modest living, asset accumulation, patient compounding, independent judgment, you'll build genuine financial freedom, not quickly, not easily, but certainly. The decisions that lead to financial freedom aren't secrets. They're just unpopular, and that's exactly why they work.